Good evening and welcome to First Baptist Church Hazel Wednesday night Bible study. We sure are glad to have you. You're looking so good. All your bright, shiny faces. Why don't we start out by standing up and doing a little bit of praise and worship. I know not why God's wondrous grace to me He hath made known, nor why unworthy Christ in love redeemed me for His own. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. I know not how this saving faith to me He did impart, nor how believing in His word wrought peace within my heart. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. I know not when my Lord may come, at night or noonday fair, nor how without the veil within, or meet Him in the air. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. Whew, you're sounding good tonight. I actually heard one or two of you. That's remarkable. Trying to walk a little bit closer. I am weak, but Thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble eyes
All right, you can be seated. Thank you, Ann. We're glad that you're here tonight. Open your Bibles to Joshua chapter 7. We are out of the Pentateuch. Be sure to tell all of your friends that we have moved on in the Old Testament. And I love Joshua. In fact, really, Joshua, Judges, from there on, there's some great stories to share and great lessons and messages from God's Word. And so be sure to tell somebody. And if you're watching online, first of all, thank you for watching. Secondly, if you're able to come in person, please come in person. I think God would want you to be here if you can. So we're in Joshua chapter 7. As you know, the Israelites are now in the process of claiming God's promise to them of capturing the Holy Land. They are in the Holy Land, the promised land at this point. Last week we saw how the walls of Jericho fell, and they have been a part of this amazing miracle and this amazing victory as they walked around Jericho once a day for 6 days, and on the seventh day walked around 7 times. And on the seventh trip around, they all shouted, played the trumpets, and God caused the wall to fall, and God gave them the city. Now today in Joshua chapter 7, we're going to see how they continue to take the Holy Land, but an interesting development happens, well actually a couple of them, and so tonight's strategy is completely different than Jericho, interestingly, and we'll talk about that. But before we get to that, look with me in Joshua chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. But the Israelites acted unfaithfully in regard to the devoted things. Now let me stop right there. Oh, that's bad. They couldn't have been on a higher mountain peak. Top of the world. They have taken Jericho, and it was a great city. Now they've just got a whole bunch of little cities to face. And before they can even do that, it says the word "but" at the beginning of the chapter. And so this is going to be a repetitious thing, especially in Judges. And it's unfortunate, sad, heartbreaking, but the Israelites acted unfaithfully. How could they do that? How could they be on top of the world like that? How can they have just seen this amazing miracle and yet mess up already? They've only been there for days, and they've done nothing but win, and yet they messed up. The Israelites acted unfaithfully in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now, if you remember, God told them before they went into Jericho explicitly, this town is mine. Everything that's in it, all the bronze, all the gold, all the silver, all of the goodies belong to me. Your job is to wipe out the evil people that live there, and we're going to burn it all to the ground. But the good stuff, the spoils of war, what's called the spoils of war, aren't spoils of war here. They belong to God. And so God says, I want you to take those, put them in my treasury. You keep nothing. Not 1 shekel, not 1 penny, not $1. You don't keep anything. I'm going to give you the victory. You're to be obedient and not keep any of it. Pretty simple. God doesn't say, look, you're not going to keep any of it unless you're this tribe over here, or unless you're 50 to 60 years old, or if you're over 65, or the women can keep some money, but not the men. He doesn't give them anything confusing at all. He doesn't say, look, I'm going to tax you 15%, but you get a child tax credit. I'll send that to you in the mail every month. He doesn't do any of that. He just simply says, you keep nothing from this town. I keep everything from this town, from my treasury. Doesn't say he'll do that for every town, just this town. Pretty simple. How many people are there among the Israelites? Millions, a couple of million, 2 to 3 million people. And of the 2 to 3 million people, everyone obeyed God except one guy. One guy. And his name is Achan. So he took some of the some of the things, and so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Verse 2, now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which, by the way, I pronounced Ai. I don't know, how do you pronounce it? Do y'all pronounce it differently? Yeah, it's either I or Ai, so I just spell it out, Ai, which is near Beth Aven to the east of Bethel, and told them, go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the people will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary all the people, for only a few men are there. So about 3,000 men went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. So, I don't know if it's bad spying or what happened, but the spies came back and said, there's only a few guys there. You don't need many. Just send a few guys. And so they sent how many men? 3,000 men. So they got millions. So they probably have, 600,000 or 800,000 fighting men maybe. And so he said, don't bother, just send a little group. Here's what they didn't say. You need to pray about this. And you send however many people God tells you to send. God's not the formula at this point. So they just did what the spies told them to do, and they received a shellacking, as they say. They got a whooping, as my dad would say. And what's interesting in the result of that was, it says, at this, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. What people? Israelites. So the Israelites, who had just experienced this incredible victory over thousands upon thousands upon thousands of heavily armed soldiers in Jericho, God gave them that miracle, and it only takes a whipping from a few people to bring them to their knees, and their hearts melted and became like water. I don't know why they didn't say, well, why did this happen? God gave us victory over here. He didn't give us victory now. And so something must have happened. We need to find out why God didn't give us victory and repent or do whatever we need to do to get God back on our side, or get back on God's side, is what they should say. And then God would give us victory again. They didn't do that. They just immediately gave into fear. Verse 6, then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. That was a sign of mourning. And Joshua said, "O sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" That may be the most pitiful speech in the Bible. I wonder, I hope your prayers and my prayers aren't that bad, that God is looking down going, man, that's the whiniest thing I've ever heard. That was pitiful. In fact, well, I'll get to that in just a moment. The hearts of the Canaanites had melted when they heard about the conquest of Israel. But now the tables were turned, and it was the Israelites whose hearts were melted like water. The general, who had not known defeat, that is Joshua, spent the rest of the day before God and before the ark at Gilgal, and his leaders with him. They're all in mourning. It's interesting they didn't say, that was a bad strategy that spy gave us. Let's go get that spy. Those spies, they didn't do that. And Joshua didn't go, we only sent a few men, a tiny, tiny fraction of our army. Maybe we should send in the whole army. No, immediately he just throws up his hands. It's over. We're done for, over this little town of Ai. Notice in his prayer, Joshua sounded like who? Did you notice? He sounded like the unbelieving Jews whenever they found themselves in a tough situation that demanded faith. Oh, that we had stayed where we were. They said this at the Red Sea, when they were hungry and thirsty in the wilderness, and when they were disciplined at Kadesh Barnea. They had said this over and over again. Oh, if only we had stayed in Egypt. Why would this God bring us out here just to kill us in the wilderness? Their faithlessness had produced that conclusion over and over again. They have one little defeat here. They got a nosebleed. How many of them had died, by the way? 36 of them had died, and they're throwing up their hands and say, we give up, we quit. It's just terrible. It would have been better had we died in the wilderness. Really? Wow. What does it take for you to lose your trust in God? What does it take? I can't tell you how many times I've heard over the years of ministry people that would say, I've pastored 4 churches, and people would say, well, I used to go to church, but my loved one died, and I haven't been since. What they mean is something tragic happened in their life. Or they'll say this happened, or I went bankrupt, or I lost my business, or my spouse left me. And so they point to some tragedy, some bad thing that happened, and said, I follow God, but something bad happened, and now I quit. In other words, they're saying, I don't pursue my faith in God. I'm not faithful to God, and it's God's fault. Is that not what we're saying ultimately? God, why did you allow this bad thing to happen in my life? Now listen to me, as a human being, I don't subscribe, I don't desire to see my loved ones die or suffer. Nobody does. As a human being, I don't want to go bankrupt or have bad relationships. Nobody wants that. But to blame God for what happens in life, that's another matter altogether. Because if you expect to have a perfectly good and easy life in order for your faith to remain intact, then nobody anywhere will have any faith. Because we all experience suffering and difficulty. Us less so than many others in the world. All right, that's enough of that. I'm just amazed at how little it took for Joshua of all people, to lose faith. Notice in his prayer, he sounded like those unbelieving Jews. But read Joshua's prayer and you'll catch a strange note in it, wrote George Morrison. He said this, Joshua reproaches God. He seems to be blaming God for Israel's presence in Canaan and for the humiliating defeat they had just experienced. Notice what Joshua didn't say before God. I mean, he's face down on the ground for hours, he and all of his men. And at no point did they say, God, obviously we messed up. You're a great and powerful God. You could have easily given us victory just like you just did at Jericho, just like you did when we crossed over on dry ground across the Jordan. And so obviously we've messed up. Tell me what it is. Tell me who it is. Tell us how we can resolve this so that we can go about victory. He doesn't do that. He doesn't inquire. He just wants to give up. They tore their garments. They put dust on their heads and lay on the ground and cried, alas, alas, but God isn't having any of it. Look what he says in verse 10. I love verse 10. The Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? I love that. God. He goes, what are you doing down there, you big whiner? Get up. Put on your big boy pants, is what he's saying to Joshua. Get up. It makes me wonder how many times God has to say that to us. Stand up. What are you doing whining? What are you doing down on your face? Why are you so easily discouraged? How many victories does it take for God in our life for we will trust God, for us to trust God? Verse 11, Israel has sinned. This is God speaking. Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. In other words, God is saying to Joshua, it's your own fault. And as long as you're continuing to abandon your covenant with me, I'm not going to help you. And if you want me to help you, you need to find out where the problem is, fix the problem. Verse 13, go, consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. That which is devoted is among you. That is, you've taken my spoils, my tithe, what was devoted to me, to God, and some of you kept it. Somebody kept it. It took what you weren't supposed to take. Verse 14, in the morning present yourselves tribe by tribe. The tribe that the Lord takes shall come forward clan by clan. The clan that the Lord takes shall come forward family by family. And the family that the Lord takes shall come forward man by man. He who is caught with the devoted things shall be destroyed by fire, along with all that belongs to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done a disgraceful thing in Israel. So here's what God says. I want you to bring all the tribes to you, and the guilty tribe, I'm gonna let you know. Then bring all the clans, the guilty clan, I'll let you know. Guilty families, I'm going to let you know. The guilty person, I'm going to let you know. So they're going to sort it out of millions of people down to one guy. Verse 16. By the way, the ability of God to do that is in and of itself astounding. It's miraculous. I don't think Achan will consider it a miracle. But verse 16, early the next morning, Joshua had Israel come forward by tribes, and Joshua was taken. The clans of Judah came forward, and he took the Zerahites. He had the clan of the Zerahites come forward by families, and Zimri was taken. Joshua had his family come forward, man by man, and Achan, son of Camri, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was taken. So out of those people, immediately, out of those millions, God narrowed it down to one guy. Then Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and give him the praise. Tell me what you did, and don't hide it from me. Achan replied, it's true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I've done. When I saw in the plunder, this is in Jericho, when they took Jericho. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They're hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, before Joshua and the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. His name was Achan, or Achor, which means trouble, and he was from the tribe of Judah. Note in verse 26 that Achor also means trouble. He is known in the Bible, in biblical history, as the man who troubled Israel. Because of Achan's disobedience, Israel was defeated at Ai, and the enemy killed 36 Jewish soldiers. It was Israel's first and only military defeat in Canaan, a defeat that is forever associated with Achan's name. Never underestimate, and by the way, this is from the Bible Exposition Commentary. Never underestimate the amount of damage one person can do outside the will of God. Let me say that again. Never underestimate the amount of damage one person can do outside the will of God. Abraham's disobedience in Egypt almost cost him his wife in Genesis 12. David's disobedience in taking an unauthorized census led to the death of 70,000 people. in 2 Samuel 24. And Jonah's refusal to obey God almost sank a ship in Jonah chapter 1. God made it clear that it was Israel that had sinned and not just Achan alone. Did you notice that? Way back in the first verses, he says, Israel has sinned. That was verse 1, in fact. And that's interesting. Because you say, well, Israel didn't know. Those millions of people didn't know. Well, I can tell you this, first of all, there's no way Achan could have pulled this off with that much gold and silver without someone noticing. Certainly his family knew. They probably helped him dig the hole. I mean, there's just no way he could pull that off. By the way, did you notice what tempted him? The silver and gold I get. He had a big wedge of gold. It was a Babylonian robe was the first thing that was mentioned. He just couldn't pass up that good-looking robe. I don't know what that robe looked like. I'm curious now, because that must have been some robe. I don't know where he thought he was going to wear it. I mean, they've been in the wilderness for 40 years, and he put that robe on. Surely his neighbors would go, "Hey, Bob, where'd you get that robe?" Anyway, I just find that interesting. It was the robe that was the first thing that was mentioned. So we did that. Ai was about 15 miles from Jericho, and one went up to Ai because it was situated 1,700 feet above sea level. The Jewish army marched confidently up the hill, but soon came down again, fleeing for their lives and leaving 36 dead comrades behind them. If you remember, Moses had warned Israel in his last day alive that they couldn't defeat their enemies unless the nation was obedient to God. Verse 24, then Joshua, together with all of Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold wedge, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, "Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." Well, that's not an understatement. Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore, that place has been called the Valley of Achor, or Achor, ever since, which of course means trouble. The death of Achan and his wife, and his family, was certainly a dramatic warning to the nation not to take the word of God lightly. And to some, it may seem harsh. I want you just to imagine, what if God had done this differently? What if he said to Achan in front of all the people, "Look, you were bad. I understand," God would say, "that was an attractive robe. All that big wedge of gold, I get it. You naughty boy, just don't do it again." What do you think would have happened? Oh man, it would have been a field day from then on out. God had to do this because the Israelites are so stubborn, and sometimes God has to speak to us in very black and white terms because we just won't listen otherwise. I'm sad. I'm sure it was sad for everyone, but it had to happen. And it does tell us, by the way, that our sin has a tremendous amount of collateral damage. It doesn't just hurt us, it hurts those around us. Any comments or questions about chapter 7 before we move to chapter 8? All right, if you're watching online, don't turn it off just yet. These people are stuck here, but don't turn it off just yet. Chapter 8 is much better. They get right back at it now that the sin is over. Look with me in chapter 8, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Don't be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Except," now listen to this part, "you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." Now, a couple things I want you to note. Once the nation of Israel had judged the sin that had defiled their camp, God was free to speak to them in mercy and direct them on their conquest of the land. Discouragement over the past and fear of the future are the two reactions that often accompany failure. We look back and remember the mistakes that we made, and then we look ahead and wonder if there's any future for people who fell so foolishly. But God's answer to that discouragement and fear is hearing and believing in God's word, and God says to them again, what does he say? Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. God is right back with them, and he says these words that he had already said to them previously. He says it again. Said it through Moses, and then after Moses died, he said it to them again, and now he's saying it even yet again. Don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. Don't be afraid. I'm going to be with you. Verse 3. So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. And by the way, that was another thing. God gives them this strategy. It's an interesting strategy. Listen to it. He chose 30,000 men of his best fighting men and sent them out at night with these orders. Listen carefully. You're to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on the alert. So this is a group of guys. This is fighters, some of his best fighters. They're going to go hide behind the city. How many are there? There are 30,000. So when they were defeated previously, it was 3,000. So this is 10 times as many. And they're just the guys hiding in the back so far. Don't go very far from it. All of you need to be on alert. Verse 5, and all of those with me will advance on the city. And when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city, for they will say, they are running away from us as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it that you have my orders. So that's the plan. And God says, by the way, when you go there, he says, what verse is it? Did I say that yet? Well, has he said it yet? He's going to let them keep the plunder. Have I read that yet? All right. Now, there are a couple of reasons we think that God does this. First of all, we see a principle of tithing here. That is, God gets the first fruits, and the first fruits was from the first city, which was Jericho, but that's over. And it also makes me think, my goodness, if Achan had just waited one more town, if he just waited one more city, none of that would have happened. But he couldn't wait. He gave in to temptation and took it. Okay, with that, verse 9, then Joshua sent them off and went to the place of ambush and laid in wait between Bethel and Ai to the west of Ai, but Joshua spent that night with the people. Verse 10, early the next morning, Joshua mustered his men, and he and the leaders of Israel marched before them to Ai. The entire force that was with him marched up and approached the city and arrived in front of it. They set up camp north of Ai with the valley between them and the city. Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. Then they had the soldiers take up their positions, all those in the camp to the north of the city and the ambush to the west of it. That night, Joshua went into the valley. So God is not only the God of new beginnings, but he's also the God of infinite variety. Remember the words of King Arthur, who said, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. And the idea was, if God does it the same way every single time, we're just going to assume God's direction rather than asking for God's direction. God changes his leaders lest we start trusting flesh and blood instead of trusting the Lord. And he changes his methods lest we start depending on our personal experience instead of his divine promises. The strategy God gave Joshua for taking Ai was almost opposite the strategy that he used at Jericho. Did you notice? It's a radically different strategy. The Jericho operation involved a week of marches that were carried on openly in the daylight. The attack at Ai involved a covert night operation that prepared the way for the daylight assault. The whole army was united at Jericho, but Joshua divided the army for the attack on Ai. God performed a mighty miracle at Jericho when he caused the walls to fall down flat, but there was no such miracle at Ai. Joshua and his men simply obeyed God's instructions by setting an ambush and luring the people of Ai out of their city, and the Lord gave them the victory. It's important that we seek God's will for each undertaking so that we don't just simply depend upon past victories as we plan for the future. All right, look in verse 14. So they're all set up now. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fled toward the desert. This sounds like a Hollywood movie, does it not? It sounds just like a big setup, which of course it was. Maybe Hollywood just copied this. Verse 15, Joshua and all of Israel let themselves be driven. I already said that. Verse 16, all the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua, and they were lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. Well, they weren't very good strategists either. I'm not a military guy, but anyway, that just sounds odd that they fell for that so easily. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. Verse 18, then the Lord said to Joshua, hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city. So Joshua held out his javelin toward Ai. As soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. Now I can't help but to notice there's a correlation here. God has Joshua hold out what? His javelin. And as soon as he holds out the javelin, there it went. It reminds me of Moses and his staff. But more about that in just a minute. As soon as he did it, the man in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. Verse 20, the men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising against the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction, for the Israelites, who had been fleeing toward the desert, turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all of Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that smoke was going up from the city, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. The men of the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the desert where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it, 12,000 men and women that fell that day, all the people of Ai. So there were, as far as adults, there were 12,000. I can do the math. Assuming half of them are men, that means 6,000 men. So you have a force of probably 600,000 to 800,000 Israelites and 6,000 men. It probably didn't take very long to end that. Where was I? Verse 24? When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the desert where they had chased them, when every one of them had been, I already said that. Oh, verse 26. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. So again, I see this picture of Moses holding the staff, but you never hear about this. I've never seen this in a movie, even a Christian movie, where Joshua is holding out the javelin and he continues to hold it until they're all gone, and then he puts his hand down. Have you ever seen that? Does anybody remember he did that? So it's funny what we find legendary, like the staff of Moses, but then we completely forget about the javelin of Joshua. That even has a ring to it. Verse 27, also important, but Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and plunder of this city as the Lord had instructed Joshua. Verse 28, so Joshua burned Ai, made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He hung the king of Ai on a tree and left him there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take his body from the tree and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate. And they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remain to this day. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua copied on stones the law of Moses, which he had written. I had completely forgotten that. Did you know that? That Joshua got some tablets of stone and he made a copy. They didn't have a Xerox, but he made a copy of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments were in the ark, but he makes a written copy on stone. This is now, if you're counting, the fourth public monument of stones that has been erected. The first was at Gilgal in Joshua 4, commemorating Israel's passage across the Jordan. Remember that last week? The second one was in the valley of Achor, a monument to Achan's sin and God's judgment, where they piled all those rocks up. The third was at the entrance of Ai, a reminder of God's faithfulness to help his people. These stones on Mount Ebal reminded Israel that their success lay only in their obedience to God's law. So also notice, since the first fruits of the spoils of war in Canaan had already been given to God at Jericho, he permitted the army to claim the spoils at Ai. Furthermore, at Jericho, and I find this interesting as well, the victory was theirs because of a miracle of God. They didn't really do anything at Jericho, except just run in. That's not the case here. God, in his choice of strategy, required them to participate. He required them to fight. So they actually had to fight here. It was an easy victory, but they still had to fight nonetheless. So I find that interesting as well. When at the close of the day, the men burned the king of Ai under a heap of stones, there must have been a new sense of faith and courage in Israel. We don't get to hear that part of the story, for they had won another victory. The people saw that not one word of God's promise had failed. The disgrace and the defeat caused by Achan had now been erased, and Israel was well on their way to conquering the promised land. Listen, it's the same as for me as it is for you and for everybody. There are days that you and I succeed, and there are days that we fail. There are days that are just top of the world days for us, and there are days that we are just so discouraged. It was the same for Israel. Here's what I want you to know from this. It is the desire of Satan every time to get you to bog down in that valley, in that pit, as long as possible. He'll keep you there as long as possible. Now, I say it is amazing how easily they became discouraged, how easily they became despondent, even Joshua. Again, sometimes we're the same way. We have good day, good day, good day, great day, great day, great day, and then one bad day, and we go, oh, forget it. I'm out. I give up. But don't do that. That's just Satan wanting to bog you down. Tomorrow is a new day. Tomorrow is a new day. And maybe this wasn't a great day. Maybe it's not been a great week. But tomorrow is a new day. Get right with your God. God's not going to make your life easy or perfect. But tomorrow is a new day. And I believe there are victories waiting for you. Any comments about this or questions about this chapter? Okay, that ends our Bible study for tonight. Take a look with me at the prayer list for the week.